welcome to those joining us live and those watching the recording. Hope Sparks Network is a welcoming zone for parents to explore new ways for their kids to learn and for trailblazing educators to find their tribe. This place is for you. We're spotlighting Sam Young today, and Sam's going to be talking about socializing tips for neurodiverse, twice exceptional, and gifted kids. Sam is a growth-minded, two-time Fulbright Scholar and director of Young Scholars Academy, a strength-based, talent-focused virtual enrichment center that supports twice exceptional, neurodivergent, and gifted students and their families. Mr. Sam is a neurodivergent educator who has ADHD. As an ADHD learner, he has a tremendous understanding of, experience in, and respect for all things related to neurodiverse education. So I have come across many families and educators and those like Stephanie supporting educators and families who have neurodiversity of some kind, and they're looking for ways to support their learner with development and socialization. When I discovered Sam Young and his work, I was keen to connect him with more of you. So Sam, before you begin, I wanted to ask why you chose this specific topic of socialization.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, by the way, and nice to meet you, everyone that's here. I appreciate you, and hope I appreciate you hosting. And again, I think I said this last time, but your superpower is very much bringing people that are super together. And so I'm really excited to be with everyone in this room. The why, I think, is what you're asking. Yeah. Why socializing? It's a big one for me. As someone who grew up undiagnosed a couple different things, socializing was always sort of my gift, and everything else was not. So reading, writing, all the academic schoolhouse things. But if you needed me to connect and forge relationships and remember seemingly inconsequential details, it just sort of came natural to me. And throughout my experience, my dad was 2E. I am perhaps somewhere in that space. And I have just found that, humans are fundamentally social creatures who emote, who just happen to think, right? But we're social first, we're emotional first. The thinking is just something that also happens. And so I think that this gets lost a lot. And I also think it's one of the biggest concerns. And it happens to be the thing that I am perhaps most gifted in, is helping people come together, forge relationships, and connect around their strengths. So it's something that's deeply passionate for me. It's something that is deeply needed, I think, in our community. And it's something that's often misunderstood and a bit antiquated, in which we have to let go of what socializing used to look like and discuss what it really does and ought to look like.
Awesome.
So I hope that answered your question.
It totally did, with a lot of
awesome.
heart, which I can see you bring to the table. And I think the people on the call live are people who would definitely respond to this, and probably other parents and educators out there. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'm going to get us started if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, I have to be able to screen share.
Yep, there you go.
Sweet. I promise, with this great power, I will take great responsibility.
And just a quick note for Stephanie and Isabel, Mr. Sam,
yeah, call me
gonna share, and then we'll have lots of time to chat and discuss, because that's really important.
Yeah, and the way that I've sort of outlined this is that I break it up into sections, which I'll explain in a second, and then we'll pause at the end of each one and discuss. So this is really informal, so feel free. And if you have anything that you want to talk about at any point, just holler.
Chat.
Yeah, that works too.
Yeah. So
the conversation I call RS2E, which is reimagining socializing for twice exceptional students. And beyond everything that I just said, to hope, there's also the fact that we had this once in a century pandemic, right? That we haven't really seen anything of this magnitude since the Spanish flu. And that's also caused us to really ask big questions about socializing, and again, what it used to look like, what it does look like, and what it might look like. So here's our little roadmap. Here's the journey that we're going to go on. And also I have a resource that I'll pass out at the end, which has the 10 tips that we're going to talk about. So don't feel like, you need to hurriedly take notes. So number one, we're going to look at who are our 2E students. This is a term that a lot of people perhaps don't know. 2E or twice exceptional. 2, we're going to talk about socializing shift that I'm referring to. 3, we're going to kind of cut to the core and talk a little bit about neuroscience and what it tells us about these emotional brains that we have. And then 4 is the 10 tips strategically at the end, so you stay. I'm just kidding. I know if you guys have to go, don't worry, there's going to be a recording. So number one is, who are our 2E students? And there's a lot of different ways that we can look at this. This is a definition that I quite like. It came from my mentor, Dr. Susan Baum, and some of her colleagues. But it says that twice exceptional students evidence exceptional ability and disability, right? So there's this idea of these sort of dual existences. And the idea is that we have this unique set of circumstances which comprise our student. And it's important to understand this. We're going to go into a little bit more nuance in a moment. But our students are always both of these things. They are always gifted or have above average abilities, and they are always struggling with learning differences, or as it says, disabilities. And it's the combination of these two that makes our students. We like to think of them as, gifted or learning difference, right? But the reality is that our students are existing in both spaces. And for visual people, I like to think of the bell curve, right? This idea that our students kind of firmly have a foot planted on both ends. They can be 2 standard deviations above average and 2 standard deviations below average, and that can be context dependent. And also meaning, so they might do well in a certain setting and struggle in others. And it's also perhaps going to be interest and passion dependent, right? Which is where the strengths come in, and we'll be getting more on that later. But imagine a student, let's say, who has ADHD, autism, a spectrum disorder, and at the same time has a 135 IQ. I have a young student, by the way, yesterday, her mom just emailed me. She's like, I just got so-and-so tested, and turns out she has a 179 IQ. Can we talk? It's like, wow, we should talk. This is big. And here's a student who struggles to write and all these things. And one of our engineering classes, she just built a cardboard claw machine with a magnet. So like, we got some special stuff going on here. In our logo, which you see sort of on the screen and sort of over here, you see these different colors. And a little story about this quickly is, humans are social, right? We connect through storytelling. If you remember nothing else, you might remember a story that I tell you today. So the logo that we have was actually, I told a friend of mine the mission of the company when I was first starting. I worked at Bridges Academy for 8 years, and I was like, I'm going to build this online virtual school without walls for 2E kids. She said, what are those kids? So I explained, and then I said, make a logo for me, please. And he made this logo. And what's amazing is that my mentor, Dr. Baum, wrote this book, To Be Gifted and Learning Disabled, which was really the first book on 2E. And again, there wasn't the name Twice Exceptional. So it was Gifted and Learning Disabled. The and word was key. And in her book, she says that the yellow represents a student's gifts, okay? And that the blue represents the learning disability or difference. And the green is the whole child. So they are not yellow, they are not blue, they are always green, right? That they, in certain areas, they will have their strengths showing, in certain areas, they will have their struggles showing, but they are this complicated profile. And what's even more amazing is one of my favorite sayings in the space is, so again, my friend did not know this, right? And he just picked these colors. And what's more amazing is I like to say that our students are square pegs and round holes. And if you look at it, the square, you can see the yellow square, and then you can see the sort of round hole, and then there's our child in the middle. And so it's really kind of an amazing thing that I believe, if you believe in like fate or something, but it's just this sort of incredible thing, which again, for you visual people out there, I hope sort of resonates with who our kids are. So going back to that definition we talked about of our students having these 2 realities, what can happen is a lot of confusion, right? There these kinds of gifting, masking, which can happen. And what we see is three kinds of masking, right? We can have a child who has learning differences that are so loud that they cover the gift. We can have a child who has a gift that's so pronounced that it can cover the learning difference. And then we can have students who have both at a similar decibel that cover one another. And this is one of the most tricky profiles. What we know is that, and I'll give you an example. For example, if you have someone who's highly verbal, right, but they're really a low producer, they may seem like they don't have a learning difference at all because they're so intelligent. They're talking years beyond their age. They're perhaps in a 10-year-old body having a graduate level conversation with you about the needs for transportation in the 21st century. And we haven't asked them to write an essay or do anything. So we might not see a difference or a challenge area. We might just see the strength. But if we put them in a different context, and okay, now write an essay about something you don't care about, all of a sudden it can be quite pronounced, and we might only see learning difference, right? So this is a really important thought I want to revisit a little bit later. But much like you perhaps, I think we're educators in here, you've maybe seen that cute little cartoon of the teacher at a desk and there's like a tree in the background, right? And the teacher says he's got like 6 different animals. There's like a penguin and a crow and a giraffe and an elephant and a squirrel. And he's like, first one to get to the top of the tree, the test today is get to the top of the tree or something like that, right? It's like not all these animals are going to be able to do that. It's not their strength. Ask the fish to swim, it's going to get an A. Ask the elephant to do elephant stuff, right? So context is key. Context is king. So again, masking is important to understand because our students who might be 2E might not always appear as 2E. Okay, so now we have our little intro. We sort of have a basic understanding. We're going to move on to our sort of second part here. And at the end of this one, we'll take a quick pause and discuss. But if you have any questions, again, put them in the chat or let me know. I'm happy to chat. So, and Stephanie said, yes. So what I want to talk about is, I mentioned in the very beginning, things are changing, right? That socializing is changing, and it may be, and this is a tough pill for often parents to swallow, it may be that we have it wrong, okay? And maybe that we adults have it wrong and that we're holding on to sort of an antiquated version of socializing. So during the pandemic, obviously things changed a great deal, right? And parents were concerned. Students were isolated. Many students are isolated, and the struggles weren't even, right? Some people struggled more. They might have certain differences, diagnoses, et cetera, that might make things really difficult. And while it seems like we're still sort of in the tail end of this pandemic, this once in a century pandemic, it's really difficult to make it through and just say, okay, things are better now, let's move on, right? There's a lot of difficulty, but I think that the silver lining is important. Again, I take a strengths-based perspective, and I think it's important to remember that yes, we have had this really difficult time, but it largely exposed us to perhaps new ways of thinking. Okay, and I'm hoping that we can kind of like talk about those a little bit. So there are people who are concerned about, gaming and a lot of tech and tech addiction and things like that, and that's true. But I bring up the idea that there have always been like sort of a mainstream and an other stream, right? And that our students might be, if we kind of let go of how things come to pass, that's going to be a big theme today, that they might be socializing in ways that are different from what we expect, right? My idea of socializing might be every kid gets on a bicycle, they ride to the center of the cul-de-sac, they throw rocks at trees, play baseball, and then they come home dirty and shower for dinner, right? But the reality is that that's even before technology. People were meeting in basements, playing Dungeons and Dragons. They were connecting on forums online, right, in the early days of the internet, and sharing their interests, or chat rooms, if we remember, the 1990s and things, right? So things have always sort of existed where there are different groups and different things. And yes, socializing is so different, as you guys are saying in the chat. And many people, I would argue, are sort of holding on. Now we're here together connecting in a Zoom, right? So we're adopting, but it seems to be different when we're talking about our students and our children, right? We sort of have this idea that the way in which I did it is the way in which it's done. It's a very human condition, right? We overgeneralize. When you're a child, you might call someone mom, and then you might think someone else is your mom because they are similar, they have similar characteristics. And humans often, you know, again, we're emotional creatures. We tend to do this as adults as well. So I'm really interested in crypto, and I am a big fan of this young guy, Vitalik Buterin. He's a Canadian, actually, and he started Ethereum, the second largest crypto and arguably maybe the most important crypto. And he has this quote here. He says, you know, I saw everything to do with either government regulation or corporate control as being plain evil. And I assume that people in those institutions were kind of like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, sitting behind their desks saying, excellent, how can I screw 1,000 people over this time? And I share this with you for a number of reasons. One, what does this have to do with socializing? Well, here's a young man who was a huge World of Warcraft player who was frustrated because of a game update that actually limited his character's ability and frustrated him beyond belief about the centralized control. So what he did was he thought, I'm going to make a decentralized internet upon which people can build and connect, and there will never be a central authority which can shut it down and limit our power. And so here's a young man who I think he was 17 at the time he founded Ethereum, now has created what we call Web 3.0, right? The new internet. And what he's done is recognized a problem, taken to a space that he understands and knows, and created arguably a new internet for people to connect, commerce, and really change the way in which we live. Now, again, why do I share this with you? Well, not to be too dramatic, but the way in which this young man has reacted to a real problem and created a new space is probably closer to what socializing is going to look like. And if you follow sort of like big Silicon Valley funds and things, where's a lot of the money going right now? It's going into things like the metaverse and the crypto space, right? Even right now, what we're doing, Zooming, you may not have fathomed this 10 years ago. What will we be doing in 10 years with VR headsets and so forth? So the reason I sort of share this experience is, one, here's a young, probably 2E guy who created a whole new version of the internet because he was frustrated about something that he was deeply passionate about. Two, that's going to forever change the world. The market cap is larger than many countries just on this little project that this young teenager created. And three, he has sort of ushered us forward into perhaps a new era of socialization in which older people may not yet quite understand, and younger people may perhaps be more geared up for. Another quick story here, and then I'm going to transition to some talking points. But what we may see as the future of, we might think, oh, it's important for our students to be able to go to a store and look at someone in the eyes, do certain things. Sotheby's is buying real estate in the crypto universe and allowing people to transact this way, right? You might go to a DMV, by putting on your headset. Students may not ride their banana seat bikes anymore and pile them up on the front lawn. We may very well log in sort of Ready Player One style. And so I sort of go at this at length just to take you on a little tangential realization that we may have to let go sort of a bit more than we historically have. So things are changing, right? And I'm going to pause here and open for discussion. But it's important to realize that times are changing. It's important to understand that the way in which we've done it isn't necessarily the best way. It's just a good enough way because it got us where we are. And that our students are changing and they're adapting with the times. They are spending a lot of time online, and that might be concerning. They're spending a great deal of time perhaps gaming. And there are real concerns, right? Tech addiction is a real thing, and we should perhaps be worried about it. Even some of the sort of great minds that we like to romanticize, like Steve Jobs, wouldn't allow technology at the dinner table, right? And would allow tech restrictions on the weekend. So it's important that we keep these things in check, but it's also maybe a time to perhaps let go and ask ourselves, and this is one of the big themes here, what do we want our students, what do we want our children to be doing? And are they doing it in a way that we didn't otherwise see? I want my student to connect. I want them to lead. They're running a Discord forum. They're running a Reddit page. That's a place of importance. Maybe they're building a Steam around that, right? So perhaps they're doing what we want. It's us that has to let go of how it comes to pass and see it a bit differently. So I want to sort of open for discussion, and just if you have any general questions or any thoughts around this, I welcome them. And also, if there's someone in your life that's your child, that's a 2E student that you work with, or neurodivergent or gifted student that you work with, is there perhaps a way in which they're meeting some of these social needs that you haven't otherwise thought about until perhaps right now? And no pressure to share, by the way. I'm happy to yap all day.
I
was gonna. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, go for it, Isabel. I'll cede to you.
It's so interesting because our child is neuroatypical, and has led us to have some resources from the healthcare center, and that is exactly what his psychoeducator told us last week. What the way of socializing and what they're creating is so vastly different from what we may have grown up with as kids, that it's the value of it is not looked at the same way. Hence our reactions to that child's success or involvement in what they're doing can be undervalued or underestimated. So it's very thought-provoking. It's a completely different way of looking at what is an acceptable socializing activity.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Isabel. And keep that person in your corner. They sound pretty switched on. Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's so true that we might need to let go of things and rejig how we look at it. And the way I often come at things is from a place of, is their well-being sound? If you've got a kid who's spending all their time on the screen, but you're hearing that they're engaged and they're having healthy relationships and they're thinking about what others are experiencing and they're adjusting, like all of that stuff. If that's there, then there's a lot less of a concern about the screen side of it than there might be if the person is just playing single player games and that's, there's still a potential judginess in that. But like, I'm just giving an example of how, if we come back to looking at how is the child doing? And then there's also the piece of, well, how is our family doing? How are they doing in a context of school? Is this the way they're socializing? Is it supporting a healthy family dynamic? And if not, why? Where do other members of the family, like usually the parents, need to let go? But where might the young person also be invited to realize that, if you're on your screen all the time and you're having these amazing interactions, could you show up for dinner? Again, really show up. And then all of a sudden, that moment of connection to the family, which happens to be real life probably, makes everything else feel okay. And so it's easier for the parents to see beyond the, oh my gosh, they're just on their screen all the time. So I think there's often some parallel realizations or parallel thinking that can help us to celebrate the wonderful stuff that can be going on in the other worlds.
Absolutely. And it's important to I use the language, being black and white versus being gray, right? Can you, instead of walking around on your device, sort of connecting and then like shoving food in your face, can you show up in your space that's important to you? And can you show up for us here rather than be somewhere in between these two worlds? And I think that's really important, Stephanie. The lens upon which we're gazing can really help the way in which we see these things, right? And if we're saying, is the whole child happy and fulfilled? And you're right to be critical, because it is important. Someone who is an addict is not thinking clearly, right? So if someone is genuinely hooked on tech, they may thank you later if you help them liberate themselves from the addiction in that way. So it's important to be critical. I'm certainly not, dismissing that. And I think it's important to have boundaries. But I also think, and I guess my key point is, let's investigate before we judge, right? Let's ask, can I sit in and watch you game today? Do you mind if I hop in and can you show me? Oh, interesting. Right now you're connecting over an interest, you're getting a little bit more insight and you're seeing what's really going on, right? And I think that's important. But I love that point. Thank you.
Can I just share one thing? Stephanie's actually really helped my family in helping to see where there is well-being, what is naturally working well. And us parents, sometimes we want to get in the way of what might actually need a little bit of time to develop. The students' like interests or diving into a rhythm with technology or rhythm with their learning that we don't relate to. But if we keep up, like getting up in their grill and being like, this isn't the way you need to do it, or you have to do it a different way, the way we did it, or like it interrupts the child's flow. And I think it can cause a lot, at least in our case, it caused some friction. The more we're able to step back as parents and say, okay, let's try it out. And you go there deeply in your flow with what works for you. Then you start to see the kids kind of emerge and feel better, more well. And the parents can, it's like a self-perpetuating loop that can create a new rhythm. But I have to say, just having mentors in kids' lives that are not parents, sometimes, like Isabel and I probably both attest to this, sometimes it doesn't
Yes.
how well you articulate or how you sit down with them and be like, let's game together. They don't want to be with us.
Right.
It's natural. They want to go to someone like Stephanie, or they want to have a mentor like you, Sam, who is able to kind of disrupt and be that different lens and person in their corner.
And that's one of the 10 tips, by the way. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, like you said, disrupt, Hope, and from our kind of the road we've been taking is more trying to understand more than trying, as you said, to be in their grill. That's very funny, because we're assuming certain things. We're assuming this is not a good thing, and as Stephanie said, the child's reaction and well-being. It's you get, and we've been through it, and the sense of having a child who is consumed by screens and is grumpy and not happy, versus, as you said, Sam, like, I'm running a Discord server, I'm talking with people from all over the place, we're talking about ideas, and coming downstairs excited about, oh, we talked about this today, we did that. Very, very big difference.
Yes.
And it's up to us as parents to understand the value of that.
And I'll be getting more into that too as we get to those sort of 10 tips. But you guys are switched on. You've already got like 6 of the 10. So bravo to you. All right. Is it okay if I go on to the next part 3? All right. You tell me if going too fast, too slow. I generally like to sort of plant seeds and then discuss. Go ahead, Hope.
No, it's great. Please, over to you.
Okay. All right. So this is just a sort of a quick, thinking around some neuroscience and just kind of explaining, some of the ways in which we can look at our brain and understand our brain. And for one group, especially ADHDers, we have this incentive salience model, right? This idea that we're sort of dopamine pursuers, right? And if we think about our sort of dopamine reward system, this is really largely responsible for our motivation, right? Again, humans are moving towards the feels. If something is difficult or challenging, then you're going to get resistance. Okay. And if something, as we just gave the example of like being on a Discord server and running downstairs and being like, connecting with these kids from all over the world, and we're talking about high level stuff, and no one in my geographic zip code is doing this. And, that's exciting, right? So your student's going to go more towards that. So a lot of the times when we think about socializing, it's important to kind of think about how your brain is functioning, right? What's happening? These are very basic functions. These are not higher level thinking functions using your prefrontal cortex, right? These are emotional. These are sort of your midbrain thinking about, what feels good, right? Now, of course, we don't always say that when we think like, why are you doing this? Why are you staying up all night and gaming? And why are you not doing your homework? It's like, well, one feels good, one feels terrible. I've got trauma around school, or, last time I hung out with someone, it was very loud in that place you made me go, and I'm sensitive to the sounds. And when I'm online, I can control these things, or the lights are too bright, or whatever it may be. So I want you to think like associative thinking, right? What kind of things are happening in your child's life that are dopamine increasing? And the key here is reinforcement. If we want our children to do certain things, can we make that a positive experience? Can we positively reinforce, rather, so that they go to these stimulating experiences, these dopamine rewarding experiences, rather than, having things that make things feel increasingly worse? Because then, that polarization, right? So a little going back here, I love this quote. I interviewed someone on one of my shows, Dr. Lynn Limgo. I don't know if she originally said this, but she said, humans are emotional creatures who think, not thinking creatures who emote. And again, if you think about your children, right, like what's the last part, or your students, what's the last part of your brain to develop? It's the frontal lobe, right? That's all the executive function, right? That your frontal lobe is your air traffic control tower. So when we're saying, hey, I want you to be able to X, Y, Z, well, that's good, but they may not be there yet, right? Like a lot of the times we know that brains are sort of like a fingerprint. They're all wildly different, and that they exist on a continuum. But it's important to remember that if we know that our brains sort of develop this way, that we start back here with basic functions like emotions. And it's also important to understand that it's through the development of our frontal brain that we can start to do the higher level things. But this is a big takeaway. So if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. The social emotional needs of our students trump the intellectual needs of them, right? And this is, again, really important. Whether you're, thinking of sort of Maslow's hierarchy in the humanistic psychology perspective, or whether you're looking at neuroscience of brain scans, we are emotional first, and we cannot do the higher order things unless we have these emotional needs met. So if your student is meeting needs in a way that you're not familiar with, and then we shut that down, we're going to have them be less successful in the way in which, right? If they can't sort of unlock this level and we want them here, and then we shut down the little thing that they had here, it's a video game. They can't level up. They can't get where we want them to go. And we've actually accidentally made it more difficult for them. So just, I want to plant that thought again, that one of the big takeaways here is that we have these social emotional needs of our students, and they're actually enabling the learning to happen. And without them, it can be more difficult, right? And that gets more complex with our kids, because our students have these great asynchronies, right? You have a 7-year-old with a 140 IQ. They struggle to connect with other 7-year-olds because they have different interests, but they have the awareness of their intellect, with now a chasm, a gap between their intellectual intelligence and their emotional intelligence, right? Struggling to make friends. Why don't they care about when I talk for 30 minutes about the history of the railroad, and I can't talk to adults because they think I'm immature because I cry when I drop my ice cream, and this is so frustrating, and I can't write the paper about the thing that I'm so informed about, and it's so tough. And that causes this negative self-talk track, right? Intelligence can be challenging when we have lower social emotional intelligence, right? So a classic IQ, and that gap can be really challenging. And this this happens for these different reasons, right? We have, yes, there's a great deal of frustration. If no one is seeming, if you understand at the ripe age of 11 the weight of global warming, and your friends are talking about like plushies and Minecraft, it's like, are you kidding me? Like, your house might be underwater in a couple of years, and you want to talk about Minecraft? Like, and there's a blow up, or there's difficulty. So, high intelligence, high expectations, and trauma, right? These are sort of the big three. If we have our kids that have really high IQ, then they need to be around other students with these asynchronies, right? We know that the research tells us that they need to be steeped with other students who are also asynchronous. 2, there's often high expectations, right? When you see on paper, oh my goodness, this talk that I told you I'm going to have with this mom with the 179 IQ daughter is going to be all about number 2. Hey, it's awesome that she has this, but she doesn't have to use it. She doesn't have to do anything with it, right? We should stimulate her, and we should encourage her and create a really nurturing environment. But let's let her pick what that looks like. Now that you know this, we don't necessarily have to treat her in a certain way and expect certain things from her. We're just going to create more opportunities so that she may, in fact, take advantage at a higher level. And then 3 is trauma, right? It goes back to 1. If you have a student with a gap, they may have had a difficult experience in some places, and that asynchrony can be really difficult and can cause some traumatic experiences, right? So I'm going to start to kind of wind this down, or this part. But great minds hang out together, right? This idea that when it comes to socializing, our students really need one another, and that they experience more of the good things, more of the feel goods, more acceptance, more belonging, more patience, more empathy, and more stimulation. And that's important because a lot of the times, this is where I kind of circle back to the internet. We can connect people who may not otherwise be able to connect. It might be someone in Quebec or Chicago or Florida, and you can now link up with people. And that's infinitely changing our ability to access, right? It used to be find the smartest person in your town, right? And now we can steep ourselves in enriching environments, sort of our choosing around our niche interests. And that's a pretty big point there, because I mean, that's why I created like our virtual school. It's so that 2E kids who are marooned can come together, feel safe, feel seen, and explore their really quirky interests with other students. And, you know, once a kid's in this environment, going back to the mentor comment that came up earlier, what I call sort of the X and the Y axis, once they have the usually neurodivergent or gifted mentor, you know, above them, their older person, and then they look around and there's neurodivergent gifted peers with similar interests, they can say, these people are like me, that person's older and like me, and feels like it's going to be okay. I feel understood here. I feel seen here, right? And we're not focusing on what we haven't done. We're focusing on, you know, what we have and what can be done and what others are doing. And that can just give us a level of security. So I want to once again pause here, and I hope I'm taking longer than I thought. I'm sorry. But I wanted to sort of open this up.
That's great. I wanted to find out if Isabel and Stephanie, while we still have you, if you had questions or had comments.
I honestly, I'm hanging on your every word, Sam. I will be asking my husband to watch this after, because I think like we are starting on that path of looking at things differently, but I think it took the help of Hope, it took the help of Stephanie and a bunch of other people to get us there. And yeah, I think it's keeping an open mind about it. It's a new world, that things have changed. My son's best friend is in the UK. They speak every day. He's homeschooled too. Super high IQ. He's finished in an hour and a half. But they're, you know, in their own way, like changing the world. But he's happy talking to them. Then, to Stephanie's point earlier, you know, if it fits the family mold, then there's joy, and you know, everybody can find you know, happiness and contentment in this. Then we should really need to embrace these new ways of thinking, socializing, learning.
Absolutely. Again, I mean, and no matter where you are in the journey, you're on the journey. And that's really important, because bodies in motion stay in motion. And a lot of people stay put. And so the fact that you're asking questions and you're letting go and you're opening yourself up to seeing these things is fantastic. And you should give yourself some self-love and some hugs and things like that.
Well,
that's great.
Thank you. But it takes a village, right? So I really appreciate like the ladies on this call, because you would have asked me 2 years ago if this was even a possibility. I'd be listening to you, Sam, going, yeah, okay. So any parents, you know, kind of struggling with this, it's worth the thinking about alternative paths. Ultimately, for your child's success, whatever that means, you know, happiness, whatever.
Absolutely. And I love the V word. People say, what's, you know, when I started Young Scholars Academy, like, so it's not like a school with grades, and it's not like public, but it's not a homeschool. And I'm like, no, it's a virtual village. It's a virtual village. There's events, there's mentors, there's parent community where you can come together. There's sort of village elders who can shepherd your kids. And there's also other kids like yours. And that's really the idea. And so when you say it takes a village, I know it does. And I agree with you. Other people.
I love that. Stephanie, before you leave us, do you have any questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I was going back to when you were talking about high expectations, and there was a teen I was mentoring a couple of years ago, and one of the also 2E, and one of the things that was hardest for her was people continually saying to her, "We want to help you to realize your potential." And I hadn't thought about it quite in the same way that I've been thinking about it now, listening to what you said. But she named that so often as being a barrier to her well-being. Like, never mind her achieving her potential, just to her feeling well. This constant hope that she would reach her potential. So that was one thing. And then I was also going to say about the families that I work with, and when I see people kind of come to that point of like nothing's working, like they're on the computer all the time, or they won't go to school, or whatever it is. The good thing about finding some way to start opening up is that on the other side of that lives joy. And when you're in that place of nothing's working, and it's awful because you feel like you must be failing your child. Like, it's terrifying. It's a horrific place to be. And as you start to open up, you have these moments of joy, and those are the seeds that allow growth. So yeah, so much of what you're saying so far, and I do have to go in a couple of minutes, but is that how do you have the confidence and the trust to maybe let go a little bit and step forward and see what's going to happen? So you're giving people the tools to do that. I really value it and appreciate it. And I haven't checked out your website yet, but I can't wait to do so.
Oh, thanks. I think you're right on. It takes confidence. It takes a lot of courage to do something different and I like you said, step out and take a step forward. And it's really frightening to a lot of people, and it doesn't always go well. And that's part of the risk, right?
Yep.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained. If we don't take that first step in our hero's journey, then we are still in the Shire, and there's no journey to go on the quest, right? So I think that's so important, Stephanie, and I appreciate that. And I like the idea that like joy is just on the other side. We just have to put one foot in front of the other.
And I think as well, like one of the things that's so important is the relationship that people have with their kids, be it the parent to the child, the mentor to the child, the teacher to the child, the school system to the child. And when the relationship is happening in the context of like, we've got to get you back to school, or you've got to be doing better and realizing your potential, it's all this kind of energy. And as soon as you see people kind of go, okay, what else might we do? The relationship shifts in that moment. And the power that lies within that shifted relationship is massive. All of a sudden, you're potentially working with the child. Like, their mind can start opening up because they don't have to be like holding your thoughts at bay anymore. Like, so yeah, anything that can help that shift to start happening is amazing. And the research that you're presenting is one of the hugest things that helps parents who are scared. It's like, okay, but there's research that shows that this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. So that's wonderful to have that as part of this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to listen until I have to bow out, and then I'll just like silently leave and watch the recording later.
Oh, that's okay.
I will share the recording and I will connect everybody. I was hoping, Sam, you could share before this ends how people can participate in your village. I don't want us to get off and because basically we're stirring up these waters, and people are going to want to know, okay, so how does my child connect with this kind of belonging, patience, empathy village that you're offering?
Yeah, and we can stop here. I mean, the last part is just the 10 tips, and I've put them in a PDF that you can access. I have it here. It's just kind of on like a page where you put in your email and it sends you the tips. And then there's also like a follow-up interview with Dr. Marcy Dan, who's one of my mentors. And that's there. I'll also send, if you're interested, these are our courses. They actually are open for enrollment right now, and they close Monday. We have spring courses that start, I think it's the first week of May. Yeah, May 1st or 2nd. So you can take a look at the kinds of programming that we've got going on, and see a little bit about the work that we're doing and our mentors and so forth. A lot of them are full, but thanks, Stephanie. And so you should get an email that has the form. And then I think there's like another email that follows like a day after that with Dr. Marcy. And if you don't get it for whatever reason, let me know. But yeah, I'm happy to stop here, and we can just look through the 10 tips or whatever you think, Hope.
I know, 10 tips, please. And then we can.
Okay, okay.
Got the email, the system works.
Okay, yeah, okay, good. No, it's
I'm going to
awesome.
say farewell. Thank you
Okay.
so much for this. I really enjoyed it and really appreciated it.
See you, Stephanie. So nice to meet you. I look forward to talking in the future.
Sounds good, definitely. Bye, Hope. Bye, Isabel.
Bye.
All right, so here's our, I put this Robert Downey Jr. because it just cracks me up, but we're there. Okay, the solutions, the 10 tips. So again, those are all in the resource that I shared, but they are largely the through lines from our conversation. So you should be able to reference back and think about the things we've discussed and maybe even have predicted some. Number one is the most important, starting with involving our child, right? If our goal is to help our child build social relationships, can we involve them in the process and ask them how they are currently doing it? What might it look like, right? How are they meeting their socializing needs? And how do they want to, right? Rather than prescribing something that they do, can we sit down with them and involve them in the conversation and get them to perhaps open up about things like goals and life mapping and, well, you know, I want to be a programmer, so it makes sense for me to take this coding class. Oh, interesting. Didn't know that. Well, of course it does. Do you think at some point maybe speech and debate could be a part of that? Could it be helpful, right? And we can start to incorporate a conversation rather than, hey, do this. Okay, so number one is just involve them. It sounds simple. It is simple, but you can have great conversations and you're always going to get more buy-in if your students are part of the process. And they should be. That's the point of strength-based growth. Number two, introspection. Okay, you know, it's important that we pause and reflect and that we encourage our students to do the same. Okay, as we've explored today, that there are spaces in which there can be trauma, there can be real difficulty, there can be deeply held beliefs. If I have to go do this in person, it's going to be terrible. I'm a failure. That one time I had that horribly embarrassing thing happen, and we might see it manifest in a variety of different ways. And so, you know, our goal is really to get them to reflect and reflect with them, and then, you know, make a shift if we can to sort of positive psychology. What are ways in which we can have more of the goods? What are ways in which we can have more of the feel goods? And can we program our lives so that there is more of that, so that we can subsequently feel good? Because it compounds, right? If we can have our students doing more things that build confidence, that feel good, then we are going to be doing this one, number three, which is, oops, oh my goodness, I just messed up. Here we go, sorry. Then we can be doing more strength-based stuff, right? And we know that our students have pronounced strengths, and because they're asynchronous, sometimes have pronounced difficulties. A lot of people feel like, well, when someone has a pronounced difficulty, I should steep them in it so that they get better at it. And that's not really how we build confidence, right? You know, if someone's superpower like Hope is connecting people and bringing people together, yeah, I would not be doing Hope a service by saying, you know, Hope, we really need to worry about your Excel spreadsheet abilities. And I feel like until we can get those, you know, formulas down in Excel, you're just not going to socialize well. That's not helping Hope. Hope's strength is bringing people together that need to meet. And she's a conduit. If I can put her in more places like that, she's going to do a better job. She's going to feel better about herself. And she's actually going to affect more positive change. Just like taking the spreadsheet guru and making them socialize the way Hope does. Okay, that's not their strength. So we need to have people in their strengths, and we need to help it align with their profile. How do they learn? What do they like to do? What should they not do? Okay. If someone, again, is really sensitive to loud noises, don't make them go to loud birthday parties all the time. That's not good socializing. That's not going to help them probably. So we want to be more in our strengths. Number four, this is a controversial one. I say, don't be afraid to curate, right? What do we want as educators? We want our students to want to do things. Or parents, we want our students to want to, but they may not be that ready for it yet. And they may not be aware of the opportunities out there. So going back to step one, we want to involve them and get insight. What are the kinds of things you're looking for? And then two is, okay, now we know what they're interested in. Now we know maybe what they want more of. Let's maybe do a bit more. Let's facilitate something. If they're really interested in adventure, but going out is really scary, maybe we host a board game night at the house. Maybe we play Dungeons and Dragons online. You know, we're getting them in a space that they like, And we're curating it. Yes, it will be great if one day they're able to do this on their own, but they're not yet, and that's okay. So let's meet them where they are now, and let's curate something, and also be flexible and give agency. And again, once again, kind of let go of how it comes to pass. Okay. Some people like structure, right? Some of our kids want to know exactly what's going to start, what's going to stop, when it's going to be, and so forth. Number 5, and this goes back to what was just written in the chat, changing things up. Also for ourselves, number 5 is being vulnerable. Can we open up and share difficulties for ourselves and talk about times we've maybe had to pivot, right? Knowing that we have intended to do certain things and maybe been paralyzed and not been able to do them, or knowing that we've tried things we thought we'd love and didn't, and it was okay to quit, or knowing that it's not always going to be this way. And I say it's important to be vulnerable, not to overshare, right? If we have students who have had traumatic experiences, sometimes sharing ours can be helpful, sometimes it can be harmful. So we have to, read every student and meet them where they are. But it's important to be building this sort of vulnerability and this sharing, and help students understand maybe their own actions, sharing our actions, and understanding. And I use the example of bullying here because, some students have been bullied. And when we can be vulnerable and show that, maybe we've experienced something similar, or sort of open up a conversation about why these kinds of things can happen. For example, actually I experienced something at work where someone was really mean and they kept making these comments, and it turned out that they were actually having a really difficult time. And actually that they were acting this way because they were feeling this way. And that can help our students, not just connect to us, maybe connect to others, build more empathy, and maybe share some of their own vulnerability and open up when they feel safe to do so. Can't force this one, but it can be helpful. Number 6, control. Sort of goes back to number 4. Can we allow our students to control and envision as much as they can? Some students, especially our students who are going to be on the autism spectrum, may very well struggle with things being amorphous, with things being ambiguous. And if you can allow your students to control as much of the environment as possible, we're going to go to the same park where we always go, we're going to play the same board game at the same table at the same time on the same day. If we can allow our students who need this to have it, we can have less to worry about, right? We can give them the gift of being able to just focus on the one new person that came to the board game night, or the one new thing that's changed. And when we have limited variables, we're going to have greater success typically, because there's more known than unknown. And that's going to empower a lot of our students. So we may think, oh, we want to switch it up and we should totally do something different. That may be great for some of our students' profiles. But if you have a student who has a little bit more rigidity, who has a little bit more anxiety around change, then I would say the opposite can be true. Maybe control as much as you can. And just like you would in experimental design, right? We're kind of running an experiment. Can we just change small things and track them and see how it goes? Okay. Number 7, I think this is a good one. 7 and 8 are sort of concrete. People often go to a talk like this and they're like, I want tips. And mine is often sort of like a headspace, right? It's kind of a cognitive shift, a thinking space. But number 7, I think about the friction rule, right? So if we want to help our students design, thank you, Sia, thanks for coming by. If we want to help our students design and create a better world around them, and we want to do that with and for them, then one really easy way to do that is to ask, can we reduce the friction in between you and the desired outcome? If you love sci-fi and you're reading in your bedroom, is there a chance you would read the same sci-fi at a bookstore or a coffee shop? Just that little adjustment, we're reducing friction. Now you're doing something that might allow someone to walk up to you and say, oh, Terry Pratchett, I love Terry Pratchett, right? Or you're maybe increasing friction for things that we don't want to do as much. Maybe that, going back to tech, right? Where we want to socialize and have healthy relationships, but our phone is always near us and we get distracted and we don't do the things. Can you simply take your phone and put it elsewhere? so that we can focus more on socializing. We're increasing friction here. Can we put more space between us for certain things and less space for others? That can be a great way to sort of change habits and routines around socializing. Number 8, the other one that's sort of concrete tips. I use this for a lot of students who struggle with small talk and banter. You know, it's like socializing can be really difficult, and I certainly don't think that like social skills classes are particularly helpful, because a lot of the times they're deficit based. And what I mean by that is that they're focused on like helping fix kids. But the 8th one here is little tips and tricks. Okay, instead of me talking about you, can we talk about something? It often feels a little easier if we can go from sort of head to head. Let me ask personal questions about you and you ask them about me. That's hard. Can we have a shared experience? Can we both talk about a fountain or a piece of art or something like that? Then we can have some common ground, and now we're unified. Another one that I also like is the 3-to-1 rule, or I also call it IFR, which is inquire, follow up, and relate. Sometimes having a little formula. Am I talking too much about myself? Am I asking enough questions? So the 3-to-1 rule is asking 2 to 3 questions and then sharing. So inquire, follow up, relate. I like it's easy to remember. I inquire, I ask you a question. I follow up with another question about that. Oh, you're interested in gaming. Do you like stealth sneaking games? And then I might relate. I'm a huge fan of the Metal Gear Solid series, so that's why I ask. And then I go back. So sometimes having just a little formula can help our students to find that balance. And I always say, you know, well, it's old and maybe outdated and definitely has some 1930s life advice. There is some concrete advice that holds true. And I'll have all my seniors read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, because I do think it's such an important book for socializing. 9, going back to something we've said previously, I won't spend much time on this one, but empowering. Can we build confidence in strength areas? Can we give our students responsibility? Ironically, sometimes the students who feel like they couldn't handle the responsibilities are the ones that need it the most. Can we find creative ways to have them do something that makes them feel important, so that they feel important, right? That's important. That is necessary to building affect, building self-esteem, and feeling good. So, and then finally, number 10, I mentioned this previously, mentoring. Okay, the importance of mentoring. We know, we think back to like Albert Bandura's work in behavioral therapy. You know, it's so important to be able to watch. We learn through seeing, and having someone who's like us enough that we can relate, but is different enough from our parents that we can listen, then we open up to this magic space of being able to curate a relationship with an older person who can guide us and help answer some of our burning questions. And we can model our behavior after, right? How do they control themselves when they're upset? How do they communicate when they're not? All of these little things. I think it's one of the most important things. And again, at Young Scholars, I talk about the X and the Y axis. And I believe the Y is the mentors. So 4 things we talked about today. Who are our 2 kiddos? Socializing shifts that are happening, and how what we think of socializing might actually be far away from where it's going. 3, cutting to the core, thinking about neuroscience and what our brains and research tell us about socializing. And then our 10 tips for connecting. And that brings us to an end. I have citations and things here, and that's
if you want to just go back, that would be great. Just go back on the there we go. Thank you.
Oh, this is my old email, by the way. I just realized that. I
can update it, and I'm going to pop this recording and share it with our community and Hope Sparks, and also my newsletter and my YouTube. Just getting your wonderful energy, and obviously, you know, the knowledge and stories you shared. I really appreciate how much focus and energy you bring to stories. I think it's such a tangible and accessible way to understand this topic. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. And I invite everybody who is listening and who's prompted to explore Mr. Sam's work, Sam Young's work with Young Scholars Academy. Please check it out. And Sam, you do have a spring courses coming up, and parents and educators, can they contact you directly as well if they have?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have a very intimate model. The idea is that we're small by design. So when you email, you talk to me.
That's the best. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hope. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely one.